Welcome to the Jamesburg Presbyterian Church. Today is Tuesday, October the 13th, 2020. This is the Bible study series that we're doing. The series is called My Favorite Parables, or Some of My Favorite Parables. And today we're taking a look at Luke chapter 15. Next week we'll be taking a look at the parable of the sower. It's found in Luke chapter 8, starting at verse 4 and following. You can read most of that chapter. Today, in taking a look at the parable of the prodigal son, which is how we know this parable, it's important to understand that the parable is in a context. It's in chapter 15. Chapter 15 may be the center point, the focal point of the book of Luke. It's the kind of the middle. It's where Jesus is making some serious points. There are three parables in that chapter. And the parables are precipitated by the notice in the first two verses of chapter 15 that the scribes and Pharisees are murmuring. They're saying, this Jesus guy, he eats with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes. I mean, he's just associating himself with all kinds of low life in our culture. So Jesus tells them three parables. The first two parables are actually preposterous. We hear the parables and we think nothing of them, but they are absolutely preposterous. So Jesus starts with the first parable and says, which person among you, if you had 100 sheep, and one of them strayed away, wouldn't leave the 99 sheep to go out and find that one sheep, the one that's lost, and you search high and low for it, and when you find that sheep, you bring it back, and then you call all of your friends, and you have a celebration. Just so, there will be more celebrating in heaven over the return of one person who repents. Now, very quickly, because this isn't about that parable, no shepherd in their right mind would leave 99 sheep to go find one sheep. And the reason is sheep are not incredibly intelligent animals. And if you leave them on their own, they'll do whatever they want. They'll go off wherever they want. So when you go off to find that one lost sheep, you're going to come back and have to find the other 99. Secondly, are you really going to leave the 100 sheep now and have a party with your friends? I don't think so. The second parable is about a woman who loses a coin. She has 10 coins and she loses one of them. And she tears up her whole house looking for that coin. And when she finds it, she has a party for all of her friends in celebration of the found lost coin. Let's equate that to something else that is a little more common, because I suspect that if any of us lost a quarter in our house, we may not even know about it, but if we did, we wouldn't tear up the whole house looking for it. But keys. How many of you have lost keys? These are my church keys. I lose them from time to time. It's because I'll put them down in one place and then not remember where they were. And then instead of putting them in the key basket, which is where they should be, I have to do a fast search of everywhere trying to find my keys. How many of you remember being invited over after I found my keys for that great big celebratory dinner? Probably none of you, huh? Because I don't do that. We don't celebrate the finding of lost keys. We don't celebrate the finding of lost coins. And in biblical days, neither of these things were done either. So what Jesus is saying to them is, while none of you do that, there is amazing celebration in heaven with God and the angels when something or someone who is lost is found. Then he tells a third parable, and this is the point of our study today. The parable is typically called the parable of the prodigal son. But that only tells us about one character. There are three primary characters in this parable. We might better call the parable of the dysfunctional family, or the parable of the prodigal son and the older brother. Of course, in that case, it only points out two of the three characters that we're told about in this parable. So maybe the best title would be The Parable of the Prodigal Son, the Waiting Father, and the Older Brother. This tells us something about all three characters. Again, some things that happen in the parable probably wouldn't have happened in real life back in Jesus' day, but I'm going to tell you this story anyway. And as I do, I will comment on it rather than read the story and then comment on it. We're told, and we launch into this immediately, there was a father who had two sons. There was a man who had two sons. And the relationships here are important to note. It's as important to note what Jesus says as to what he doesn't say. The father seems to be the center of this household. He is what is holding everything together. The two sons are not called brothers. And apparently it reflects the fact that they don't have much of a relationship. The younger son comes to the father and does something that is legal but very disrespectful and very rude. He says, "Look, Dad, I know that I'm going to get an inheritance when you die, so how about giving it to me now?" Whoa. Father isn't even dead, and you're asking for your share of the inheritance. You're asking for those things that you would get in the will when your father is dead. So what he's doing, he's not only asking for his stuff, he is also terminating a relationship with his father. He asks for the things. Now, in biblical days, assuming that there were just two children, and we're not told that there are other children. There could have been a sister. There could have been a couple sisters. We're not even told that there's a mother in this picture, and it's because the story centers around these three characters and not the rest of the family. But we can assume that they are as dysfunctional as these three. But back in these days, the older son would have gotten 2/3 of the inheritance, and the younger son 1/3. That's just how it was done. The older child got a double portion, and it was just part of how things were done in this particular time period. So the younger son comes and asks for his stuff. He wants what is owed to him in the inheritance, and he gets it. The father actually gives it to him, and then he takes off. He goes to a foreign country, so he's disconnected himself from his family and united himself to foreigners. Think about that, the relationship that has been broken and a new relationship that is created. He has left his family to join up with foreigners in a foreign country. We're told that in this particular case, he launches into some wild living. He squanders all that he has. He has turned the material assets into cash, and he has spent all that cash. We're in the initial part of the story, we're not told exactly what he spent his money on. We just are told that he spent it on riotous living. He gets into a position where he no longer has resources to buy food, so now he has to hire himself out. And the only job that he can find is working as a hired hand to a Gentile, taking care of pigs, swine. Pigs were an abomination to Israel. There were a lot of things that were said about pigs. There are things in the Jewish law, Leviticus chapter 11, verse 7, and Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 8. But there is a place where the rabbis declare, none may raise swine anywhere. And cursed be the person who would breed pigs, and cursed be the person who would teach his son Grecian wisdom. So these kinds of things were well known. Apparently the pigs are fed with a pod. This pod was common in the Mediterranean area. It was used primarily to feed animals. From time to time when there was a famine, they would be used by humans. So he's doing this, living a miserable life at this point in time. We're not told his living conditions, but I'm guessing that he wasn't staying at the Hilton anymore. And the son is completely destitute. And we're told that three things. He came to himself. He finally woke up. The light bulb came on. He realized that what a mess he has made of his life. And this is the first step to turning around, and it's the first step of repentance, recognition of what you have done. And he realizes that he is no longer worthy to be called his father's son. As a matter of fact, he's the one that broke off the relationship. And he did it deliberately. He did it when he asked for his stuff. He essentially said to his father, "You are dead to me. Give me what I would inherit from the will." Excuse me. So he gets that stuff. He's squandered it, and he's decided that now it's time to go back home. But instead of trying to replace his relationship with son and father again, or recreate that relationship, he would sign on as a hireling. He is going to ask his father to make me like one of your servants. Employ me. Give me a job. So he starts his way back to the house in the country he's from, and rehearsing this speech that he has sinned against his father and against God, and that he's no longer worthy to be called a son. Hire me. Give me a job. The second part of the story is it shifts the focus from that younger son to the father. Apparently the father has been looking out the window. There are famous paintings about this parable where the father is standing in front of a window with a light on, looking for his son to return. When the father sees the son, he does something that is outrageous. And again, the Jewish audience that was listening to this parable for the first time would have seen this as preposterous. The father runs. Back in this time period, men, older men especially, were considered to be undignified if they ran, especially if you're running to somebody who has offended you. But running in itself is just a very undignified movement. And we're told the father runs to his son, throws his arms around his son, kisses him on the cheek, and the son begins his speech. Now, this picture, this snapshot of the father running, throwing his arms around the younger son and kissing him on the cheek, is reminiscent of the story of Esau and Jacob in Genesis chapter 33 at verse 4. Jacob has offended. He's the younger son. He has offended his father and his older brother Esau. And now he's coming back home. And he's concerned about what will happen to him because of all the things that he's done. He sends an entourage ahead of him so that they will be greeted by Esau and Esau's men first. He sends his family in another wave of people and goods and cattle, and then he himself comes. When Esau sees Jacob, he runs to Jacob, throws his arms around Jacob's neck, and kisses him on the cheek. So this story is very reminiscent of that particular story. The parable of the prodigal son is very reminiscent of the Esau-Jacob story, where there is reconciliation between the brothers. Now, before the son can blurt out his confession, before the son can say everything that he has rehearsed, his father interrupts him and gives instructions to the servants and says, get a robe for him, the best one, the first one. It could be the one that the son wore before he left. He also calls for a ring, not a signet ring, not his ring, but a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. So something to keep in mind. If the younger son has gotten all the stuff that was for him, whose stuff is the younger son getting now? He's getting stuff that would go to the older son in the older son's inheritance. The father has made divisions in his property, And he has given the younger son's portion, and what is left should belong to the older son. So the father does these things, and then orders that the fatted calf be killed and that they have a celebration. And the conclusion of this second part of the story that centers around the father, not the younger son. The father says, "This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." He was dead because he had broken the relationships off with his family. He had broken the relationship off with his father. He dishonored his father. He was disrespectful. He treated his father like his father was dead. But now, in returning, he has established himself as alive. And not only that, in essence, the father is restoring the relationship with the son. This boy is not going to be a hired servant. He's going to be a son. Part 3. Many of us can understand part 3, I think, as we think about this story. The older brother. The older brother comes in from the field. He's been working very hard all day, and he asks a servant, "What's going on?" Because he can hear the music. He can hear the people all excited and chattering in the background, and he wonders what has gone on. And the hired person says, "Your brother has come home." The older son, from his perspective, has no brother. And he's going to affirm that perspective in what he says to his father. He says to his father, when his father comes out to him, just as the father came out to the younger son, the father comes out to the older son. And the younger son starts his monologue and says, "I can't believe that you've done this. What were you thinking? What are you thinking? You have called a party for this person who doesn't deserve this party. When this younger son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes and comes home, you have killed the fatted calf, and you're creating a celebration. Meanwhile, I've worked for you. I've slaved for you. I've been out in the field, and I've never asked for anything, and you've never given me anything. Not only that, you haven't even given me so much as a goat for a celebration with my friends, yet you do this for this son of yours." So again, the older son is he doesn't say father. The younger son, when he comes home and sees his father, says, "Father, I have sinned against God and against you." The older son says, "Listen here, buddy," kind of paraphrased. Listen here. Listen here is how he starts. Never refers to the relationship that he has with his father, possibly because in his mind he doesn't have a relationship with his father, or at least at this point in the story he has no relationship with his father. And then he talks about his deserving and the younger son's undeserving. He throws up a fact that we don't know, we haven't been told before, that he squandered his money on prostitutes. We don't know that. But it's an assumption that the older son has made. Maybe he's heard some things we don't know. So the older son is angry. The older son believes that he deserves something. He deserves something from his father. He deserves something in life because he's been walking the straight and narrow way, whereas the younger son doesn't deserve anything. The younger son has squandered everything. So he details what he has done and details what the younger son has done, refusing to recognize the younger son as his brother. The father says, "Son," addresses the older boy as son, noting the relationship that he has with the older son. "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." So the father acknowledges that the son has all these things already. They're his. But he says, when your brother came home, we had to celebrate. We had to celebrate the fact that he is alive again. So the celebration is about The parable is about relationships and estrangements. And again, in every parable, we are supposed to figure out which of those characters we are. Think it would, in this culture of ours, those of us who are part of the religious community would maybe see ourselves as the older son, especially when somebody from the community visits our congregation. We haven't seen them before, and they get treated as in a very welcoming and inviting way. And we might be a little resentful when we see this, especially if the pastor is doing it. They're not the ones that are always here. They're not the ones that are always working. They're not the ones that are always contributing to the collection plate. And yet this parable reminds us of relationships. All of us have a relationship with each other. We're brothers and sisters in creation. In terms of what we would expect theologically, God is like that father in the parable, and God has children who are wayward and children who are very, very much connected to the religious community. And the question becomes, those people in the religious community, don't they have a right to some greater portion of things than the Johnny-come-lately kind of person, the person who just joins at the very last moment in their lives? Doesn't the person who's been a lifelong Christian have a better castle in heaven than the person who joins in the latter years of their lives? It's part of that expectation, and it goes back to the whole idea of works. One of the things that a commentary pointed out, and I was interested in reading it, is that there has always been problems between brothers. Cain and Abel, problem. Ishmael and Isaac, problem. Jacob and Esau, problem. And it's also noted that the younger brother, in these cases, the younger brother became part of the line that became Israel. It wasn't Esau who became part of Israel. It was Jacob. Jacob is renamed Israel, in fact. It wasn't Ishmael, the older son of Abraham and Sarah, that became the family line that meant something. It was Isaac, their son Isaac. So Ishmael was born to Hagar. So the younger son, who is not supposed to inherit anything like what the older son inherits, is part of the family line of Israel. And it's interesting that the scribes and Pharisees do not see a relationship with these other people. They see them, in fact, as riffraff, as people who have lower value in their estimation, people that aren't worthy of God's love, when in fact God, or the Father in this parable, has equal love for both sons. Now, it seems to me that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Jesus doesn't tell us how the story ends. He doesn't even tell us if the older son goes into the celebration. Did the older son go back and try to make amends with his younger brother? Did the younger brother try to repair the relationship with the older brother? We're not told how this happens, because the story, we have to figure out who we are in the story and then do the right thing. And if the story is concluded by Jesus, nicely finished, and they all lived happily ever after, we maybe don't have that opportunity to then see how we need to function. So the temptation here is to not have the right relationships with those around us, and Jesus addresses that. And in this preposterous story, tells us what the kingdom of God is like, so contrary to the way we function in our world, celebrating lost sheep, celebrating lost coins, celebrating lost sons. And this is how you and I should function as followers of Jesus Christ in our lives. Well, that's the story for today. The parable leaves us with the question of whether the older brother joined the celebration. Did he go in and welcome his brother home, or did he stay outside pouting and feeling wrong? The parable ends there because that is the decision each of us must make. If we go in, we accept grace. We accept grace as the Father's rule for life in the family. Well, thank you for watching today. Next week we'll pick up the parable of the sower. It's in Luke chapter 8, starting at verse 4. You can probably read the whole chapter, and then we'll move on from there. Tomorrow I'm doing a really spectacular devotional, again using some interesting props that I hope will not only be entertaining but also insightful. I will see you then. We'll live stream at noon again. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon. Stay safe, stay well, take care.